Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Baka podcast.
Baka. It's amazing how every time you open your mouth, you prove you're an idiot.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to Baka. We're an anime podcast. Every 2 weeks, we talk about an anime that we've watched. You probably already know this, but some people might be new. We watch an anime that we've decided on. We watch it separately. We come together on this podcast. We discuss it like in a book club format. Then we turn over the discussion to our comment sections and see what you guys thought, to answer the questions that we can't figure out, and we're going to have some of those this time. Yeah, that's the format of this podcast. We thank you for pressing play. To discuss the anime that we have tonight, we need the help of my co-host. First up, we have the L to my light, Jeremy.
Hey. Just more of the same over here. I guess I could talk a little bit about how interesting the Octopath Traveler is, as far as like from a wannabe game developer's perspective. I love what they did with basically it's a little RPG in case you haven't played it before, and it's kind of a love letter to old JRPGs like SNES era. But one of the things that they have as a key difference between a lot of RPGs that I've played is when you're on the main map and you're just walking around talking to characters, you actually have like these little things, they call them path actions, and they're little abilities that you can activate depending on which characters that you have in your party. And for the most part, they're distinctly different. So like one of them will actually allow you to take any townsperson with you, because you allure them because you are an erotic dancer. And so you allure them and they're going to go with you, and they act as sort of a summon for your party that will attack enemies for a certain number of times that you can summon them, and they'll stay in battle for a little while. But then you have a variant on that where you have this other person that can actually capture monsters and keeps like a little pen of monsters, basically like up to 7 or 8 monsters that they can use. And that idea was absolutely fantastic, having these little path actions that you can do and different really distinct abilities that they have. So yeah, absolutely love that game. Yep, very cool.
I've heard other people tell me how much they love that game too, so you're not the first person to tell me.
I kind of miss that they don't have status effects. Not really. Like they can't really put you to sleep. They do, but it's not really capitalized on very much, but everything else is pretty cool.
We also have the Zenigata to my Lupin the Third, Jason.
I don't know that reference, but
you're only on an anime podcast. Why would you?
I am doing pretty great. I'm sure Troy would be really happy to know that Heist League of Path of Exile was released yesterday. So I've been diving into that. You literally get plans to go rob people, and then you get take a team and you go like try and beat the alarm, basically.
Are you going after actual players?
No.
That would be so cool.
Rob other people's hideouts. Yeah, that'd be great. But the other game I played was the newer Rusty Lake one. I know it's not that new anymore. But Samosa, right? Or
Simokara? It's literally their oldest game, and they remade it and put it into the Rusty Lake lore.
Yeah, if you understand just on a very surface level the actual story thread that's the cool thing is through all of these Cube and Rusty Lake games, there's a story thread going through. This one is pretty great, especially with the secret shrimp ending, which unless you pay attention to their Twitter, you wouldn't even know it exists. But yeah, had a blast with that. So
good pick with that one. Good pick.
Thank goodness for Reddit with telling me about how to get the shrimp ending, because I was like, I even follow them on Twitter, and they'll post a picture and be like, "Oh, that's really cool of them," and then like a month later they'll release the game. They're like, "Oh, you didn't examine that picture and find all the clues? What was wrong with you?" My bad. And my name is Troy. I've been watching a lot of movies still. I don't know if I told this before, but recently watched The Babysitter, which is a horror movie that was on Netflix because the trailer for their sequel came out and showed up on Netflix. And I watched that trailer and I was like, oh, this looks awesome. I'm going to go back and watch the first one, watch it with my daughter. Very fun take on horror murder movies. I don't want to spoil it other than to say that they take like all the tropes of your classic old 80s horror movies and they flip it upside down. And it's really fun. And then yeah, they came out with the sequel, The Babysitter Killer Queen, and it was still really fun. It more veered into a B horror film, but it was great.
It sounds like the title of a B movie.
Which it's trying to be. Like it's adamantly being silly. Like it's not ever trying to take itself seriously. And those are kind of my favorite horror movies. I'm really into horror movies where the killers are inept and like are more of the in their own way than the actual main protagonist trying to survive. I remember
It adds an element of comedy.
Yeah, the Ready or Die horror movie where the guy had to look up how to use his crossbow in the bathroom on YouTube. like that's my kind of horror villain.
So is that like a scary story back in the day, or what was it? Is the joke on Scream had Anna Faris?
Oh yeah, Scary Movie.
Scary Movie, that's what it was.
Scream itself. If you watch Scream, the killer is terrible, especially when he goes against the main characters. They knock him down like 100 times, and he gets back up like, "Oh, I'm gonna keep coming at him." It's like you're not very good at this. It's not like Michael Myers with the mask. Like he's like lowering himself from the top of the stairs with one hand and always one step ahead of you. The Scream killer, Ghostface killers are quite not good at their job.
This is really not good.
Yeah. So speaking of killers and Rusty Lake and mysteries, I don't know if mysteries was mentioned, but let's pretend it was. The anime that we watched is called Id Invaded. This was Jason's pick, and it was good. It's a thriller with murder mystery in it. It's like Seven meets Inception. Plus, there's another movie I'm not going to mention yet because we're not in spoiler territory.
Plus a little bit of Rusty Lake.
So let's go ahead and go to our non-spoiler reviews and let everyone know what we thought about it. Jason, you picked it. What'd you think?
I was enthralled. I saw a preview of it and I was like, this seems like such a cool idea. Because I believe the synopsis is like they're basically able to dive into the id of somebody else in order to solve murder mysteries. And yeah, it's very easy, especially with mysteries or puzzles in media, for the writers to stumble all over themselves. It's very easy to either give too much away or be very cliche. This was so tightly well written, and the puzzle pieces were just kind of laid here and there for the audience to figure it out. And then they didn't go back and explain it, which I found very enticing. Because once the revelations did come, then all of a sudden you're searching your memory going, wait, oh, that's what that was. That was that. It was so good. Very much worth a watch.
All right, Jeremy, what'd you think?
Absolutely loved it. It has that sort of constantly surprising you with new surreal environments, while also surprising you with interesting mystery twists. And like Jason says, the onus is on you as the observer to catch the clues, because it does not feed them to you very openly. There's a lot of them that are just they're there, but you don't realize it until well after. It's really good. I really enjoyed it.
I absolutely loved it. I think I watched the first episode before you guys, and I remember messaging you like, guys, my mind has been blown. And I sent out the tweet on our Twitter account of like, why has no one talked about this? Where is the hype been for such an awesome show? I do have some issues with like the animation. It's not my cup of tea. It's definitely kind of stylized, and also like when you only see 1/3 of the face, it looks weird.
Mm.
But when you're telling such a compelling story, that's such an unimportant feature to me that I don't really care. I just that is one note I had that the animation wasn't my cup of tea. Um, and I do think the second half is a little bit weaker than the first half, just because we kind of get away from the more procedural. No, what is it called? Serialized? Yeah, serialized storytelling, and go into more of a long form. But it's still consistently good the whole way through, and I don't really think that's something you can hold against it. It had a story to tell.
Mhm.
But yeah, at the end, I always say like, hey, just tell your story and be done, anime. And this time I was like, what about like 100 more episodes of just like
Yeah,
new
exactly.
mysteries though? So yeah, total hypocrite this time. All right, what did you guys think of the opening and closing?
Oh, you're muted.
There we go. I really liked them. The music was decent. It definitely was no Toilet Bound, but um, the visuals were good. It was almost like like a bit of it was almost a replay of some of the first episode, but the visuals were good. It went well with the music, and then the ending song also I found myself enjoying as well. So um, yeah.
I kind of thought that they missed an opportunity after the first couple episodes, because, like you said, they show basically the first episode in the opening, and I was imagining that just maybe they would, show each Idwell as they explored it, and that would kind of change a thing here or there with the opening. But by the end, it kind of grew on me. I'm happy with what they did. It was a good decision. Um, the music, I think I preferred the ending to the opening, music wise, but I think I preferred the visuals in the opening more than the ending. The ending was kind of cool though, because it almost seemed like they were showing it was a mixture of terrain and people. So I'm wondering if those are like hints at what the idwells for those people would be, and that's pretty cool too.
Um, you guys, I mean, you complimented it, but no one is given the praise the ending song deserves. Like, I'll see you on the other side. It is a banger. Me and my wife have been walking around singing. Also, my wife loved this show. She didn't get to finish it with me. She's been watching it by herself. That doesn't happen with my wife. She's not anti-anime or anything, but she's not into robots and guys powering up. If an anime has an intriguing story, then she jumps in. She saw me watching like the third episode. She was like, oh, I know who the killer is. And I'm
Yeah.
like, oh, welcome to the show. Let's go. Yeah, the ending's a banger. The opening gave me anxiety because of pop-up windows.
Yes.
I was like, close up, too many windows. And I felt the same way you guys did about the extra focus on the first episode, but that makes sense eventually without going into spoilers, so we'll talk about it later.
Mm. Barf, 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 barf.
Okay, I'll keep going. Um, yeah, so let's go into our spoiler section. And should we start with like how this whole thing is set up? The actual, what's it called? The Metsuhana?
Mizu Haname.
Mizu Haname? You get
I never said it out loud, so my tongue doesn't know.
Yeah, so there's regular police and then there's regular detectives, but then there's like this special unit that has this device that can pick up particles of murderous intent. And it can distinguish between someone doing it as part of like their job, and but in defense, uh, which is interesting. So they can go to a crime scene and pick up these particles, and then they take those particles back to their headquarters, and they can form what's called an idwell, which is a portion of the person that left those particles behind. It's their psyche, and then they can have these people that can dive into these wells of like computerized environment, almost like a matrix style, to then explore that psyche, and it's so great because the rules there don't match reality. Very little rules ever apply as far as what actually happens out in reality. But you've got this team of people that view inside the psyche as this person inside explores around, and they're able to pick up clues. In some instances, they can like match identities of people's faces with other people that might be like missing. And then in some cases, they've been able to find like the possible location of a victim, and so that way they can then send out their field teams to go solve those crimes. So yeah, it's a super cool idea of gleaning someone's psyche from these particles that they leave at a crime scene.
So with that said, I'm now officially dropping the spoiler warning because none of that really was really spoilery. It's really just the setup for the show. But yeah, so from here on out, spoiler warning if you don't want to know what happens, and we're gonna be like, there's definitely mysteries and plot twists coming up. Who knows when we'll actually drop them because we're not organized in any way, shape, or form.
Baka, baka, baka.
Baka, baka, baka. I did put the main bad guy at the end to talk about, but if it slips out, I mean we're in the spoiler section, so please decide what you want to do. But yeah, going off for what Jason said, the explorers of this world, when they go in and we meet our main character, we're introduced to him as Sakaido, and he wakes up in this digital world of this killer that's being investigated, with no memory, and also his body is fragmented. He has to learn how to like bring his body back together, and in this very distorted, fragmented world, he finds a dead girl. This is all part of the process. When you go in, it blocks your memories so that you go in with a blank slate. And then when you see this dead girl, they always inject into the psyche. It triggers, oh, I'm solving her murder and I'm a world famous detective. Neither of those things are true. That is literally just a motivational push to make these pilots explore the subconscious of these killers so that the data team can analyze everything they do, but it also, compels them to solve the mystery of the world, change things around. It's a teamwork effort. But yeah, there's this whole team on the outside scanning everything. And so we meet our main character. Like I said, we're introduced to him as Sakaido, but his real name is Akihito. He's a former police officer who is no longer a police officer because he did something bad.
Because
And
in order to enter the wells, you must have murdered somebody with murderous intent.
And it has to be serial. It has to be more than once.
yeah. You have to desire to kill. So yeah.
Also, just as a quick note, like the reason they go in with the amnesia is a mental protection built into the system.
Which is amazing because nobody understands how the system works or why these things were there, yet they can explain and give reasons for, which sound more like theories, but reasons for why these things exist, right? So that's a reason that's given to us early on by the analyst team as the audience here. But at the same time, they're like, we don't know why the girl appears, but she's in every Idwell. We don't know these things, and we don't know how it was made because the person who made it is dead or is missing. We don't know where he is. Maybe he's dead. Who knows?
And they say it multiple times that the reason nobody knows how it works is due to political pressure. They don't want any of the political parties to be able to use, which seems odd for a law enforcement agency to be afraid of political pressure one way or the other.
I think they're a private organization.
Yeah.
That works in.
Are they private?
That's the impression I got. Yeah. Yeah. Kura? It's like its own enterprise. Yeah.
Right. That was my impression. Yeah. That they're private, that with authority from the government to help in these investigations.
That's why their field agents aren't supposed to have guns. That makes sense.
Yeah.
Now that we're in the spoiler section, the other movie that I didn't remember is Minority Report. You very much think of the way they set this up as Inception, where they're explaining like, here's how the rules of the world work. But there's also Minority Report, where hey, we're this thing with this top tech to help solve crime, and it's really important that it works. All right, but back to our main character, our pink-haired boy. In the well, he is wearing like basketball shorts and tennis shoes and a trench coat and scarf. In real life, he's now shaggy looking. He's unkempt. He's not living a good life. But what do you guys think of? I refer to him as a Sakaido. His real name is Akihito, though. What did you guys think of him?
I thought he was a good protagonist about halfway through. And then when we learn more about his backstory, I 100% identified with him going, yeah, I can see where he comes from.
Yep.
When we learn more about why he's incarcerated, I'm like, yeah, I'm 100% on board with this guy. Yep. He's, I love that he's actually a detective because, yeah, other people that go into the well, they become the brilliant detective. But in real life, he was actually a detective. So the way his mind works and how he acts outside and inside of the wells is pretty neat, and I enjoyed his performance.
Mm-hmm. A lot of the characters in this have a bit of tragedy in their backstories, and he is no exception. He has a huge amount of tragedy in his backstory. And one of the things that I actually really enjoyed about him was that I don't know how capable of a detective he really is in real life. Like, you're right, he is a detective, and he's very good at it now. But we've only ever seen him on cases where he's been inside the idwells of those people already. We don't really see him in a case where he's actually dealing with, somebody who he hasn't gotten to explore the subconscious of. And the only reason that I bring this up is because he says it himself at one point in the show where he's talking to someone and he says, I'm not good at my job. I don't do a good job, and that's why I'm always there, because I'm trying to compensate. And so it made me wonder. He is such an amazing psychologist that, and we learn this relatively quickly. He's actually able to convince serial killers to kill themselves, and that's how he gains his serial killer ability. Serial killer. He's like a Dexter basically, except he does it through words.
Right.
And
he's like
that's
Dexter and Babylon met.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what gives him his ability to go in and dive, is because he's done this. But it makes me wonder. I guess he must have. Oh, now I'm wondering if he actually did that before he got into their subconscious or not, because they would have only learned about it to make him dive afterwards.
He's making the people he's been in their subconscious commit suicide.
So how did they allow him to dive beforehand? Because remember that there's like 5 different ones that he's eliminated in real life. But I wonder if he eliminated some of them first, because he had to eliminate enough of them to be able to start diving.
Cells across from him.
Well, but they wouldn't arrest him.
No,
okay, so he would have had to do 2. They arrested him right after Challenger, the first one.
Right. And then everyone else is an idwell he went into and made them commit suicide.
That's not serial, though. At that point, he's only killed one person. He couldn't dive.
I don't remember them actually stating they had to be serial. Just that you had to have that murderous intent and actually have killed somebody.
When Hondamachi's partner got her set up as a diver, and he was telling her, "You're scary," that was one of the things he said at that point was, it's not just killing somebody, but you have to kill multiple, and it's got to be serial. So I don't know, maybe he's not as informed as the rest of them, but
I don't think he has like a super mind of I can convince anyone to commit suicide if they're a serial killer. I think he literally has to see their idwell.
And yeah, that's where I'm at too. But now I'm wondering if he didn't manage to do that at least once or twice before going into the idwell, just to get that serial. But who knows? It's not something they really clarify. I don't know if I wouldn't call it a plot hole, because it's just theory, and it would be very easily cleared up by revealing a little bit of information. There's nothing there to contradict. But it's an interesting aspect about him, I think. But yeah, I thought he was a great character. Good personality, good tragedy, consistent character. And I really felt for him in episode 10.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
I think he's a fabulous character in that. I mean, we've had private messages in a chat with the 3 of us about like the morality of his actions. And regardless of where you stand on that, the fact that this anime takes the time to play with it the whole time, we learn that like we meet a character in a little bit who's a really good detective, a really good character, and when she's in the Idwell, she doesn't care about helping people. She's like, oh, I'm going to solve the case. We see Akihito has a compulsion to help, even when he knows this. It doesn't matter if I help these people. He's compelled to help. He's compelled to save. Um, but also, yeah, he's driving people to suicide. Um, and with murderous intent, with desire to kill them, he even admits, like, I'm not quite right anymore. So, when he's facing off against a serial killer, and they're like, well, you're basically a serial killer too. He's like, yeah, kind of. And I think that's really fun to play with, of, how far they push him from good to evil, and you can really analyze. There's a lot to introspect for yourself of what is the morality of this character, and I think that's because of how well he's written and played out in the anime. Yeah, he finds the little girl that's murdered. He realizes his job to do. He's able to detach. His body was all in parts. He put it all together, but he's missing a part on his hand, so he can make his hand literally fly out and grab stuff. So he starts pulling the world together and putting pieces together, and he's examining this world. And we meet. We meet first Momoki, who is the head of this investigation team back in the real world, in the computer room that is watching all this happen. He's not his former partner, but he's an old friend of Akihito. They were definitely on the police force together, and he's in charge. So what did you guys think of Momoki, who ends up kind of... I thought they didn't use him enough in the first half for how important he becomes near the end, but what did you guys think?
Him and the rest of the team, I think this is like, I love the idea of a team helping him and him not even realizing that there was a team watching him at all. Like, that's such a cool idea. Unfortunately, the team ends up falling a bit into this category of exposition, and it's cool to watch them work, right?
Mm-hmm.
But unfortunately, it doesn't. They end up being standing characters where there's no real attachment or character development to them. And I think the strongest out of all of them would be, was it Momo, or what was his name?
Momoki is the head.
Momoki. I think he's the strongest out of them because he has this desire to save one of the victims of one of the people that, like, they were able to save one of the victims of one of the serial killers, and he took an interest in this girl, which becomes more important later. But his desire and path to save her and find her is an interesting one. It kind of takes a backseat to the rest of the other story, because I'm like, okay, yeah, that's great, but I want to know what's going on in that weird world you've built.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Probably about the same. He was kind of just a background character that was sort of organizing the analyst team, and like you said initially about CSI reference, that part was really cool. But yeah, there just really wasn't enough for him to stand out. But at the same time, I think that's really because there was so many other important things, and I don't know that he could really bring anything interesting to the table at that point.
I kind of agree with you guys, but I also kind of don't. I think very much how he's presented, like I said, he's given very little screen time in most of the story, and then at the end he becomes very important. And I kind of wish they had fleshed him out, because I think he's in a really interesting spot where he's in charge of these investigations, and he is sending in his former close friend to experience things like death over and over and horrificness, while at the same time being like, please stop having the serial killers commit suicide. It's the relationship with Akihito that makes him so interesting, and also with the girl that's murdered in there. His personal connection to everything makes everything he does have this weight to it. You know, when he says send him back in, that matters. It's not just okay. This is the job. Like it's an emotional toll on him, and every decision he makes comes with all this weight. And I think that's really interesting. But they don't take the time to show it. And then like I said, at the end, he's like, "Oh, I'm the secondary hero, and I've been really important this whole time." And I'm like, I understand why, but man, we could have spent some more time with you because you are a very interesting character.
I agree with that.
Also, any thoughts on the rest of the Kura crew?
I
really
enjoyed their
liked-
presence, but
Oh,
there was
go
any. I enjoyed their presence, but there wasn't anything like. It was cool because when they spoke, it was sort of breaking down the problem, breaking down the scenario, and giving us that second perspective. And I also really liked the fact that they were limited to seeing through the eyes of the brilliant detectives, and also just the holographic display of the general idea of what was in there. But they didn't get the details unless he saw them, and then they were able to break down the details. They had some moments of interesting conversation, especially when they were trying to solve their own mystery of like who's behind other issues. But I don't know, the focus just really wasn't on them very much. They made good background characters, I would say.
I did like that even though they ended up in the category of exposition, they were not just exposition dumps. Because their conversations were, I ended up rewinding a couple of their conversations because I was like, okay, this is not only important, but I'm missing something because there's something being told in between the lines here that they're trying to figure out. And I'm glad I did with a couple of them, but you know, none of it felt contrived. None of it felt, again, like exposition-y, but they were there to kind of forward some of the background story for the audience. But they did it in a very believable and satisfying way. I think the guy with the, I think it was the red hair and the green eyes and the band on his head.
Oh yeah.
The Beret.
I liked him the best out of all of them besides Momoki.
I agree with that. I really liked him, and I really liked Togo, the
lady.
woman.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Momoki's lady.
Yeah.
Which is like one of my
Right.
favorite parts. But like when they were first introduced, I'm like writing down their names and their roles, and as the series is going on, I'm like the names don't matter. The roles is what matter. They're roles in this plot more than they are characters. So.
I did love I've never seen that picture in the house before, and everyone just stopped. Like the entire seriousness of the situation goes out the window, and everyone's like, "Oh, really?"
Yep.
So as he continues to investigate this Idwell, he finds a room full of fragmented people, and 5 of them are currently known victims of the serial killer they are hunting, who's known as the Perforator, because he drills holes in people's heads. This is some gruesome serial killer stuff. They don't hold back. There is when you watch it on Hulu, you get a TVMA warning. So
yeah.
Should have probably mentioned that. Also, they find a picture of a character known as John Walker. And this is very quickly introduced as the main villain of the series. Basically, like as soon as they see that, they're like, okay, stop everything else, focus on that. You know, what is that about? And the face is obscured, and we find out this guy keeps appearing in these killers' subconsciousness. They know he's related to these killers. But they can never see his face. He never, they get clear information on him. He is in a top hat and like what's the coat with the 2 tails on the back? It has a name, but I forget. And a cane. And look, this only happened because when I watched this on Hulu, they showed a whiskey ad for Johnny Walker whiskey.
No.
Whose label is a man in a top hat and a red coat with a cane. And I was like, oh my God. And it never becomes a clue. I kept waiting for like who's drinking whiskey. I'm gonna solve this.
Yeah.
It's never a clue, but it is also why they named him John Walker. Like I can just now make that assumption. They saw this guy and they're like, oh, he looks just like the Johnny Walker label.
Yep.
We're gonna call this guy John Walker, which makes sense because that's a very American name. They're Japanese. They wouldn't, just pick that name out of nowhere. And I was like, that's so cool. And it was a Hulu commercial that put it together for me.
Hulu's watching. It
Yeah.
knows what you're watching.
Yeah, it was a little creepy too. Like, did it know that I was watching something?
It's trying to get Johnny Walker in your subconscious and see what happens.
It also looked creepy because I checked Twitter tonight and a guy named John Walker is fighting in a UFC fight literally tonight, and so he's trending on Twitter. So it says John Walker. I'm like, nope, no, I'm not. Well, this is not happening. Yeah, so we will talk about the mystery of John Walker when we get to it, but just know that he is the central driving mystery of this season or this show. And then we meet a detective and his young partner who looks like a school child, and we find out she's 23 years old. Thank you for taking the time to tell us that. The one we need to talk about more though is the rookie partner, whose name is Hondomachi.
Yes,
Hondomachi. I wrote down Hondo every time because that's a very long name, and I take notes on all this, and she's very important to the plot. But Jeremy, your thoughts on Hondomachi?
I thought she was really cool. Basically, she's very interested in everything about diving into these id wells. She's just enamored by it and she wants to do it, but she's stuck being a field analyst, which is still in its own way a really, really cool opportunity for her to be a field analyst. And she initially does not start out as a character that winds up having the qualities and traits that she gets pretty quickly through some physical effect, but it changes her. She goes through something that changes her, and as you mentioned initially, she winds up, her personality changes, and she describes and explains what it is that changes about her personality later. But it was so fascinating to me to see this character behave both before and after the injury that she sustains, and how they actually use that to justify her her cognitive abilities and her ability to put things together and deduce things. She's also,
you can say it. It's going to happen in discussion in like 5 minutes.
Yeah. So she actually gets a hole drilled in her head by the perforator, but not really by the perforator because she kind of leans into it to do it herself. It is a suicide attempt to try and get the machine to figure out where she is by tasting her cognitive particles of a desire to kill herself. And so this perforation of her brain, because these holes, they're not just like a little hole or anything. It goes straight through from the front to the back, like you get a breeze. And and this completely changes her perspective on everything. And one of the things that happens is she starts to see people a little bit more coldly. She's more interested in solving problems, and you see it even in just real day-to-day life when she's going on her analyst missions. She completely changes, and then when she winds up diving eventually and gets into the well, she's a really interesting character. I love the outfits that they give these characters when they're in the well, and hers cracked me up because I don't know, it reminded me of the old the more traditional Sherlock Holmes and Watson outfits, or at least what I would expect to see on them. And I love that. It was great.
She even has the pipe. She has the pipe.
Yeah. Too. Yeah. It's just, and she's adorable too, which makes it great. But yeah, I really liked her as a character.
Jason, your favorite character, what'd you think?
Yeah, the change from, plucky rookie to we're gonna solve every crime and put every, bring justice to everyone attitude was kind of neat to see the progression. But also to see this, because she gets captured and nobody knows where she is, and she's like, how can I get them to know where I am? Well, if I form an idwell, they'll know it, and then they can dive in and see who it is. And that's like, I didn't see that coming. That was a great twist, like early on in the episodes. It's like, wow. But yeah, Also, like her personality inside the Idwell is pretty great, but her ability to deduce is really fun to watch.
Yeah, I don't have much to add. She is super fun. The fact that she ends up becoming a very competent detective in the real world, and is a little colder than the other character we've already met, and her relationship
Yeah.
with the perforator himself, who we'll be speaking about in a minute. Very interesting, very fascinating, and yet just the fact that these people with holes in their head get twisted in a different way. It's never like, oh, we're all the same. Each one has a different twist to them, which was cool. And she is adorable. And so this episode, they put some together some more information. He like builds the world and it spells out a word. So they're able to figure out a restaurant they're supposed to go to. She goes with the older cop to investigate Matsuako, and they go down to get the killer, and they find a victim with a hole in his head. And they grab him, they rush him out to the ambulance, and they go after the killer. And then the guy with the hole in his head is the killer, and he takes the ambulance, and he runs her over, and then grabs her and jumps in the sewer. And that's how the first episode ends. And my jaw dropped, like, that cute, plucky anime character we just met just got abducted by a guy who's gonna put a hole in her head, and then they actually put a hole in her head. I was
Yep.
like, what is this anime?
Yep.
Very, very cool. We also need any quick thoughts, Jason, on Matsuoko, the older cop.
Yeah, he was. It's funny too because the first part of their relationship, it's almost daughter father kind of like attempt from him, and she nearly rejects it outright. Uh, After her injury, she kind of puts up with it to begin with, but he's man, he has way too much heart to be doing the job he's doing. Like he cares way too much about people. Yeah, I liked him as the gravelly cop that
By the book.
I've got a job to do and I want to protect as many people as possible. He was a great character for the field agent. You know, I don't know everything that's going on, but what I do know is we've got a job to do kind of guy.
Yeah. Exactly. One of the things I really liked about him was the fact that when you have all of these Sherlock Holmesy characters, I mean, we get 3 of them. I think it's so important to have a character like this that just kind of brings everything back to reality, where he doesn't have any special abilities. He's not particularly amazing with his deduction, but he gets the job done.
He's just a good cop.
Mm-hmm.
We talked about Akihito and his the way that it plays with his morality, and I agree with you guys that his decision was the we could totally understand why he would make the decision. If I was in his shoes, I would probably make the exact same decision. But then we find out Matsuoko hates Akihito. They were former partners, and he hates him. And I'm like, knowing what I know about him, how he's by the book, and like, we stand for something. We have to do this the right way, so this is done properly. And I'm like, yeah, I also 100% agree with him too. And I love that about him. I love that he was this opposite side of the coin, who starts out, and then he kind of loses Hanamachi to to the other way, and eventually lets her go. Yeah, I thought he was a great character.
Mm-hmm.
At one point, they kind of make him the red herring, and I'm like, no, you don't get to have him.
Yep.
It was only for like 5 seconds, and I'm like, no way. All right, so now the actual perforator himself, who I'm like, okay, this guy's creepy. Let's catch him and get onto the actual plot. And no, this guy's like, I'm sticking around. He likes to put holes in heads. Jeremy, what'd you think of Fukada?
I thought this was an awesome, awesome character. I was in the same exact boat as you when we were first introduced to him. Like, oh man, Creep City, got to take him out, get rid of him. I can't wait to see what Sakaido in the real world does to this guy. Get rid of him. But that's not what happens, and I think it's really unusual because I mean we see this record that what's his name in the real world, Akihito. We see this record that Akihito has of basically making sure that every serial killer they arrest is dead, within a short time probably of being arrested, because every cell down there is empty except his. So there doesn't seem to be any exceptions. Yet this guy shows up and he engages Akihito a little bit and then just kind of backs off and watches. And Akihito doesn't really go after him with his psychological attack. And because of that, he sticks around. And I absolutely loved where they went with him, where we get this tragic backstory of who he was and how he got to be in the situation that he got to be in. And it plays a really important part in a later revelation. So I don't want to spoil it yet, but he has a very interesting reason for making the decision he did to, at least inflict this wound upon himself, to drill a hole in his own head.
I also think there's another reason Akihito can't make him commit suicide.
Because of the hole? That would make sense.
No.
Really?
I mean, this spoiler, but we're in spoiler section. His goal is to die. He already wants to commit suicide.
That's I like that. That's good. That's good.
So I wonder if he's like, I want you to commit suicide. Yeah, I want that too. we'll work on it together. What do you want?
I just can't seem to get myself to do it. I've tried, man. See the hole?
Jason, what do you think of him?
He was a tragic character. Because at the very beginning, like, not only is he abducting one of the cutest characters in this entire anime, but he injures her, forces her to injure herself. And you're kind of rooting for him to rot in hell. But it's interesting. He almost gets a redemption arc, but not enough to where you're rooting too hard for him. And his interactions in this story are so fascinating because you're right. His ultimate goal is, how can I die? And his role in this anime is tough to read, and I think that's one of the reasons I really like this character as well. It's like you're not quite sure what he's thinking or what his next plan of action is.
There's something special too about the fact that he does get to dive, and when he dives as a character called Akaido, or no, what is it, Anaido? Anaido? Yeah.
Yes.
And we get to see him humanized.
Yeah.
Because he loses the burn mark, he loses the drill hole, and he looks, well kept. And there's something about that just changes your perception of the character when you see him in his current state, and then you see him in this subconscious, maybe we don't know exactly how their, brilliant detective persona is influenced, but I imagine it's influenced by their own subconscious. And so this is the kind of person that he is. And I don't know, that humanizes him a bit too.
I agree with everything you guys have said already. I do want to call out that he's one of my favorite character designs in the entire anime. Burn on half his face, which makes you wonder what also happened to him beside the hole he put into that burn spot, which came first. But he also has piercings on his lip and his eyebrow, which makes you wonder if he's been considering putting a hole in places for a long time, and that was just like baby steps up to it. And I think that's fantastic. And then also there's stuff on his detective thing that kind of leads to his big twist. And yeah, again, just really cool details in this character design. Like, I know I already complained about the animation, but that when I think about this anime, his face will haunt my dreams in a good way.
Yep.
Also, I should point out that in the Idwell, Hondomachi actually appears. Now, you got to remember, this is as the killer perceives her. And we find out it's because when he was attacked, she actually picked up new particles as they brought him to the ambulance and scanned them in. So he had seen her as they took him to the ambulance. Now she's a expected victim, so she now has been beamed into the Idwell, and they're like, "Oh my God, what happened to Hondomachi?" He takes her to a nearby other hidden base he has. He's getting ready to drill her hole in the head, and like has already been said, she slams her head into the drill to create a intent to kill herself, which creates an Idwell. and they immediately eject Sakaido from the perforator's Idwell and put it in hers. And he, again, blank slate, finds the girl hanging from the tree, reads the note. Her name is Kairu. And the note says this was a suicide. He's like, well, then the mystery is solved. And then this giant drill comes out of the sky and just crushes him. And this whole entire world is full of drills. Like, that's her whole psyche now, is drills. And it's crazy how much that moment just impacted everything. But
also we find out, like, if you die in an Idwell, you experience everything it is to die. And so you get extracted. You don't die in real life, but you just experience dying. And so if you're a pilot and you die multiple times, it can take immense mental strain on you. And so they're always checking in on Akihito, like, are you okay? Can we send you back? Well, sometimes they don't ask him, but
Yeah.
in the reflection of the drill that crushed him, they see images from the room she's in, and they're able to put together where she is. So they rush in and rescue her. They run her off to the hospital, and they arrest Fukuda. Togo reports to Hayaswa. He's the old guy. They basically have a director. Think the old guy in Standalone Complex, Ghost in the Shell,
Yeah.
but not as cool and not getting involved, just kind of being there.
But he's got the closed eyes.
He does have closed eyes. Yeah, and then Sakaido is taken back to his cell where, and again, now he is Akihito. You gotta understand, when I'm taking notes and you introduce a character, that's who I now, it's imprinted in my head. This is Sakaido, and so the whole time I wrote, no, Sakaido does this, Sakaido does this. It's Akihito. Yep. The next case begins, and this is kind of the one shot that I kind of thought this first episode was going to be. It starts with explosions going off in a building, and then Handomachi is visited by her partner in the hospital. She's survived. Her head is healing, and then they start talking about this next serial killer is called the Pyrotechnician, and they're able to. She's like, I want to be a pilot. He's like, yeah, you don't want to do that. And they get particles on the Pyrotechnician and they send in Akihito. This one was a really cool one because it's a tower in the middle of nowhere with a waterfall nearby, and there's the Kairu is shot on the ground, and then a sniper just starts killing all these people, and they're like scanning the faces. They're just plain people. There's no one matching any identities. They're just blanks.
Now I had a question for you guys about this one. Is this the only well where Kairu is alive at the beginning?
I'll have to refresh my memory as we get to some of the other ones.
Yeah, because
we see her die.
Yeah, we see her get shot every time.
Because the bullet that marks his cheek, that's the bullet that kills Kairu.
Ah, okay. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I guess so. As far as I recall, they always find a dead
this
body.
particular well creeped me out. Like this one was really well done. Like it's so, even though it's just a shooter, it's so unnerving, this environment, because it's a tower surrounded by a circular waterfall, so all you can see is the sky.
Yep.
And like, some people are running around, some people are hiding, and then people who are hiding start getting shot, and like, wait, that doesn't make any sense. We were hiding. He actually dies a few times. And then like, some of the people are like, I can't take it. Anything is better than being shot, and they jump to their death, and I'm like, I don't know. I think I might take my chances with a shot. But later, a lady goes to jump, and he actually runs and catches her. And then he notices that the guy who jumped earlier is down below when he shouldn't be. And he figures out the tower is spinning. They're not remaining stationary. You couldn't tell because the sun's straight up and the waterfall's all around him. but that's why the killer's location, the sniper's location is changing. And then he notices a guy who's crawling along the ground yelling, "Everybody run for it! Everybody run for it!" And this guy, I guess he's stationary and he's moving the tower so that a wooden dummy with a gun can shoot at the tower, and he just wants to watch everyone get shot.
And also the team notices when they're trying to do facial recognition on all the people that are getting shot, the people's faces keep changing.
Mm-hmm. I think that Sakaido actually interprets the situation incorrectly. And hear me out. If the tower was spinning, given its size and circumference, you'd feel it. You'd feel it. But if the waterfall was spinning, you'd probably have no way to tell.
That wouldn't move the bodies down below the tower, so the ground around the tower would also have to be spinning.
Well, that's the thing. When he looked over the tower edge, we got to see him looking for a little while, and the bodies didn't rotate. Did they?
But I thought that's how he figured out it was rotating, because they did move.
That's what he said. That's what he said. But whenever we saw, they weren't moving. Like if we're judging by the rate at which that guy is crawling, if that's how fast that the tower is spinning, then we would have been able to see the bodies move during the amount of time that he was looking over the edge. So
unless guy stopped crawling.
Didn't seem like he did though, because he was still crawling when he turned around.
I honestly, I just chalked it all up to dream world physics.
Yeah.
it didn't
too.
really matter.
Also, it was really interesting to see him continue to enter in the same well, but because he's got amnesia every time he goes in, he has to figure out each time, oh, there's a shooter, I need to not get shot. And that was cool to see that evolution.
You don't get to take your previous experience, even though it does seem like you might learn a little bit subconsciously. You don't get to bring in, oh yeah, last time I tried this and that didn't work.
Mm-hmm. What's really cool is that you do get to remember all of it in the outside world.
Yes.
Every death.
Every death. It also drives me crazy that, so we talked about the Cure team. Some of the Cure team like roots for him actively, like, yeah, go Sakaido, and some of them don't like him and are like, yeah, well, he could try a little harder. And it's really funny that like sometimes he'll be going in, they'll be like, this time can you do it this way? And it's like, he's not gonna remember that. What are you doing? Why are you holding him responsible for that? But yeah, they're able to identify the guy who's crawling on the ground, and he actually has had facial reconstruction. He was a former war photographer who became obsessed with seeing death, and now he does bombings so that he can take pictures of the people viewing the bombings, which we'll kind of come up with in a little bit. So yeah, the pyrotechnician, they arrest him and they bring him in and they put him in a cell across from Akihito, which is the dumbest move anyone makes in this entire anime.
Yeah, like if he has this reputation, he's done it so many times already. Why would you do that?
In the second episode, he's like, "Hey, also you need to stop making the serial killers commit suicide." He's like, "I've only done it like 5 times."
Yeah.
Okay, 6 times. Shame on you, Momoki.
Yeah.
But yeah, so they put this guy in the cell across from him, and he starts calling him out like, yeah, you took pictures of the observers because, yeah, people are terrible, whatever. But what were you also really looking at? You wanted to see the destruction. You're a horrible person. You actually want to die. And then we see him like tying his bed sheets around his throat and like strangling himself. And Akihito in his cell being like, doing a great job. Just a little harder. It's really twisted and messed up. So that is the end of the pyrotechnician. And Fukuda sees this whole thing.
Yeah.
Now, did they see? No, they didn't see John Walker in this one.
No, I don't think so.
I don't think they did.
I don't even know if he's one of the 7. Now that I think about the list she read, I don't remember the pyrotechnician ever coming up.
Oh,
you're right.
No, you're right. Because in the first episode, they do see an image of a guy called John Walker, and that was just kind of introducing the audience to the idea that there's this guy that they've been following through these Idwells.
There is a really good bit of foreshadowing, though, is that he attacks John Walker. I skipped that. The real a image of John Walker appears, and the killer's persona. I skipped all over that. The killer was hiding in Kairu's body. She wasn't in fragments, and he hid his fragments in hers. He runs away when John Walker, and then Sakaido attacks John Walker and defeats him easily. And I was like, okay, that's weird. And it never comes up again why this happened or why he attacked him here. But I think it's story foreshadowing, actually.
Yeah.
Anyway, sorry about that. There's a lot of details here that's going to be hard to see in my handwriting. So yeah, Akihito is put into solitary confinement, and Fukuda is introduced as the next pilot, and he's terrible at it. He dies within minutes. They put him into the pyrotechnicians as practice, and he just always gets shot. He just can't figure it out. And so he's not really doing good. Then we meet a girl who is buried in a barrel with a can of oxygen and some glow lights and a video surveillance that's live streaming her to the internet.
This one's so rough.
This is a killer known as the Gravedigger, and she mentions like, what's the longest, and she obviously knows about this killer and has seen some of the victims or knows of the victims. This is not the first time this happened. She's like, I think 55 hours is the longest anyone's gone. I'm going to survive. You guys are going to find me. And so they search for the particles to build the Idwell, and they actually managed to find some, which is kind of unique. This is the sixth victim of the Gravedigger.
Mm-hmm.
And this is the first time they've managed to find particles, but they do find the particles. They build the Idwell, and because there's a time limit, they bring Akihito out of solitary confinement and they inject him in. And this world is all these apartment buildings, and there's fires and explosions everywhere. And he finds Kairu's body, and it's burnt, and that's the mystery. Like, why is she burnt? But she's in an apartment that's not burnt. And while he's exploring, he sees on the other side of this street on fire, or the world on fire, there's another apartment building with the girl, the victim, which he doesn't know that is who she is, but she's on the top story of the other world. He has to try this one multiple times, to the point where we're told, like, hey, do you need a break? He's like, no, I just used the bathroom. And he's like, you're gonna need to clean this later. And then they keep going, and he keeps dying. They're like, okay, give him a food break, and then we're gonna go again. And they're like, it's implied that like they do this for like a whole day and all night. And the director comes in and is like, you guys need to take a break. He's like, we don't have time for a break. This girl's got a time limit. Also, and I was going to mention this in our OPED section, this anime puts some kicking songs into certain episodes. This one, episode 10, and then the final episode, this one's the samurai one. Do it like a samurai, as he's like running across the obstacle course to get to her. I haven't seen someone do that this well since Bleach with the number one song. I was into it. I was like, this is so cool. He runs across like buildings and blocks that are falling and fires everywhere, and finally manages, after multiple tries, to get up to her. And she tells him about, across the street there's Mr. Uno, who she saw kill his family, and he realizes the whole thing is the fires have killed a lot of people, but not Kairu. She was killed elsewhere, and he's hiding her death with all the other bodies that already burnt. And he's like, oh my god, this is a copycat killer, who's hiding the kill he's doing along with the real Gravedigger's other 6 victims.
Which was a fantastic way to visualize that idea. I was like, who's writing this story? Because they're amazing.
Yeah.
Right. Again, the fact that you have to figure out the logic of this world and then figure out how that logic applies to the real world, and that's such a cool concept. So they go and they arrest the real Mr. Uno. They look under his rug, the very same rug that Kairu's body was on in the digital world, and they find the barrel, and they're like, she's on the live stream, we're good, open it up, we saved her. And they open it up, and she's a rotten corpse in there. It wasn't a live stream.
So good.
it was a recorded video. And then it makes us go back into the digital world as Sakaido carries the girl out, and like, I saved you, I did it. I'm glad I could help you. And talking with her, and then they eject him out, and Momoki comes in, and he's like, hey, did you guys save the girl? And he's like, yeah, no, we couldn't. It wasn't really a live stream. And he has to carry that memory of, I saved her, but then that instant realization of, no, I didn't. Like, that's so harsh.
Dude. When they opened the barrel and they found out it was not a live stream, my heart dropped. I was just, what?
Yep.
Yeah,
Hey,
that
I
was
mean,
rough.
the police officer came upstairs and started trying to kick the guy on the ground. I was like, this is good. This is the feeling that the audience is getting, and they're even showing it to you, that the police officer's feeling the same thing. Another one's holding him back, and I was like, I'm right there with him. I'm right there with him. This is
It was definitely rough.
Yeah.
And then we see Hondo Machi. They're at the crime scene with Matsuoka, and she sees one of the victims of the perforator in the crowd, and she runs after him. And because he's got a hole in his head, and she's like, "That's weird. He's here, and also he's supposed to be dead." Basically, everyone who got a hole in their head died except for her. And then we find out, hey, someone else survived. Not counting the perforator himself, who also survived. She runs up to him, and he confronts her, and then kisses her, and then runs away. Which is so weird, and then ends up being such a great clue. So she goes back to Matsuoka. She tells him what happened, and they're driving, and she's like, I think he wanted to kill me. I think he's the gravedigger, and he wanted to kill me. But the reason we've never been able to pick up particles at any of the crime scenes is because when he got a hole drilled in his head, it switched love and the intent to kill. And so when he went to kill me, on instinct, he kissed me instead. Which means when he goes to kill someone, he's doing it out of an impulse of love. But she's like, but that doesn't fully make sense because it's just an impulse, and he would still have the realization that that's insane and stop himself, but he's actually committing the murder. So what's going on? They go to where he kissed her. They get the particles, and they create an idwell for him. And so we're sent to that idwell with Sakaido, and it's a house that's falling through an endless sky. Right, so like he starts midair and has to skydive down to it. He goes inside, and Kairu's dead in a pool of blood, but then he realizes it's actually floating off the ground, and he finds a girl underneath there who has an ever-changing face. And she's like, yeah, the guy told me there's a monster. Yep, the guy told me to hide. He goes out to figure out what's going on, and underneath the house island thing that's falling is Kazuta, the guy with the hole in his head that was recognized, fighting John Walker.
And John Walker is ripping him apart.
Yep, and he literally cuts him into pieces. Meanwhile, the cops are like, hey, I think we have enough clues that we can figure out what's going on. They figure out the barrels might have been soy sauce barrels. They go to this factory they think the gravedigger is using. They find a barrel with wires into it. They're like, there might be a victim inside. They're trying to open it, and it starts leaking out gasoline, and it's a trap, and explodes. And it's like the head investigator of the outside team, him and his crew just die in this horrible explosion.
Yep.
Meanwhile, Hondo and Matsuoka are looking at a torn up photo that was found. I forget where they found it. No, in his apartment, right? In the gravedigger's apartment, the real gravedigger. They found a torn up photo, and she's looked at it, and she's like, "Hey, it's his old schoolmates. Let's go talk to this one." And they go, and it's a woman named Inami, and they come in, and they start asking her about like, "Hey, did you know him?" She's like, "Yeah, I kind of knew him. We weren't really friendly. We didn't really talk a lot." She's like, "Did you like him though? Did he like you?" And she's like, "No, we didn't." She's like, "Yeah, you're lying."
For a little bit here, like the questions turn real personal and almost like girl talky, right?
And
like,
almost flirty too. Like there's
Yes.
almost an element of flirting
right.
in this.
And I was really confused about this line of questioning. I'm like, this does not A, seem professional, and B, like, what does this have to do with your investigation? I was lost for quite a while.
Yeah.
Until she's like, you actually really like him, don't you?
And then she she's solved the mystery at this point, and poor poor Matsuoka is like just trying to keep up. Like, what are we
Well,
talking
he
about?
gets a call like, "Hey,
That's
your
right. He
buddy's just
walks
got
out.
blown up," and he's like, "We gotta go."
Mhm.
Um, Hanamachi is like, yeah, he kissed me, you know, and 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 can tell from the reaction like that's the clue she needed. It also does such a great job. It literally shows the kitchen sink, but off center, and not hiding. There's a very obvious clue, but off center to the is the knife block, but there's no knives in it, and
Yep.
it's like, oh, red alert, red alert, that's bad.
Mhm.
It's so cool. And then yeah, she pulls a gun on her. She's like, "You're under arrest. I know you're the real gravedigger. This is Anami, the true gravedigger, who Kazuta is in love with, and because he's in love with her, and his brain flips love and killing, is killing for her, even though she's the actual serial killer, but he is now acting in her stead." What did you guys think of Anami?
Uh, Talk about an absolute sociopath.
Yeah.
She she did a great job keeping it close to the chest and being, oh, I'm innocent, it's fine. Uh, but then also like near, at the end of this encounter, like she only has brief moments of emotional like showing. It's really interesting to see just how much of a sociopath she is, that to get her fix.
Mhm. It's also interesting that when they did she have John Walker visit? They didn't go into her
Yeah,
Idwell,
they
but
do
there
go
was
into her Idwell, and John Walker is in the forest in it. It's the train. The train is her
Oh, that's
Idwell,
right, that's
and
right, that's right.
he's standing in the
Yes.
forest.
I see. I remember I had this memory that John Walker was in her Idwell. And so it's really interesting that both her and the guy with the hole in his head, not the perforator, but her boyfriend, basically,
Kazuta
both
is
of
his
them,
name, but
yeah, together are the gravedigger, and they both were visited by John Walker. And I wonder if that throws his numbers off in the end, because I don't think they counted two for this. But I thought she was a fantastic villain, even if it was like a short-term villain. And she did kind of pop back up again later in a way that I didn't expect. I didn't think she was going to be this important. Also, when he does die, because Kazuta, that's his name, right? Kazuta.
Mhm.
When Kazuta jumps out and tries to attack, Hondamachi kills him, and her reaction to this when she looks at him dying, I really thought they were going to go with that sick reaction where it would just be more of the same, where it's like, well, she's a gravedigger. She gets off on seeing people hurt or killed. She likes that. I kind of thought that's what she would do when she was looking at him. And I was looking at the way they drew her mouth, and I thought that looks kind of like a creepy smile, maybe. But her eyes didn't say that. Her eyes said loss. And
Yeah.
so it was a little bit confusing, but at the same time, I kind of liked it because it made her a little bit more human, especially when we do go into her Idwell and find out. I don't know why I keep wanting to call it an Idwell, and find out what her history was and what drove her to do this. But yeah, she's very well put together.
I absolutely love this subtle thing that they do through the whole thing, where like she keeps talking about how like we've never kissed. Even though you can tell she's clearly in love with him, and he's definitely in love with her, they have such a broken psyche that they keep each other at a distance. And when you go into each of their idwells, it's exactly the same. She's the little girl that was hiding in his, and he's outside battling the monster. So they're separated there. And then on the train, which we're going to talk about next, he's sitting across the aisle, and she refuses to look at him, and he has to stay over there. They have this weirdly broken relationship that somehow became functional enough to murder people in a sick way. And
Yep.
what a fascinating character! And I think her coming back at the end is insanely introspective, because it brings up an eye for an eye. You took something of mine, I'm taking something from you. But now we're seeing it from an evil person, an evil character saying, I'm coming for my eye for an eye. And even though we've been rooting for a good character who's went for an eye for an eye, I think she's a great addition to the thing. And she's kind of the wild card, mess up the end situation where we know where everyone stands, and all of a sudden she's thrown in, and I found a gun.
Right.
So I
Yeah.
think her character is a great addition to this whole thing.
Mhm.
Yeah, but like you said, Hondo actually gets him to Hondo Machi actually gets him to jump out by pretending to shoot her, and that's how she gets the causes to jump out. He starts throwing those kitchen knives, but yeah, she kills him. They arrest her. They go into her idwell, um, but we learn quickly that she gives up the bodies right away. She's like, "Well, there's no point. I can't keep doing this. You might as well have. I can't watch them die anymore." And she's just fascinated with people dying. But in her idwell, which is when Sakaido goes in, he finds Kairu murdered and bloody footsteps leading away. He follows the bloody footsteps and it takes him right back to where he was. And it's an infinite loop of a train. And we find out that her mother was hit or committed suicide by train. They say hit, but it sounded like she jumped in front of the train to die.
Mhm.
And she was
on
train.
the train that it happened with, too,
right?
right?
And so her
was.
idwell is forever being on that train as it's happening. Like it's the moment of that death forever for her. And Sakaido actually sits with her and talks with her, and Kazuta is across the aisle. They're both in child form, and she's like, "Quit looking at him." He's like, "Hey, you want to come over here and sit with us?" She's like, "Don't invite him over here. Like he has to stay over there." But yeah, we kind of just see how messed up she is, and then yeah, John Walker is out in the woods of the train. It's a really like there's no real mystery here to solve because she gives up the information, but it's just this really nice introspection into how messed up she was.
And it's an opportunity for Sakaido to just sit there and actually relax. Like the murder is solved with Kairu too, because Kairu actually like killed herself and then walked so that he would know where to go to find the kids. Like that was the sole purpose of her death in that one. And so then he's just able to kind of sit and relax with them for quite a while.
And then he does get a scene where he's literally crying over Kairu's body. We've been told at this point that he has a daughter that has been murdered, and they keep telling him like, "Don't equate Kairu with your daughter," but he can't help it. Especially his subconscious can't help it. His subconscious wants to save this dead girl because she's a young girl, just like his daughter was. We also get Matsuoka recommending here that Hondo Machi become a pilot because he saw her kill, and he's like, "You're scary." She's like, "Thank you for recommending for promotion." He's like, "I didn't do it as a favor. Like, you're a problem in the field. You want to kill people. You enjoyed murdering or killing this man. So you should be a pilot because that's what pilots are."
Well, what's interesting is that the first thing he points out is that she has a tendency to put herself in risky situations because she's actually suicidal. And that in itself is a danger for her partner as well. And then he does bring up that she will murder too. So yeah, in a way, it's interesting because both of these good characters, their drive to murder is either murdering murderers or murdering self. And yet that's good enough for the machine.
Right. We also learn that they find surveillance cameras at Fukuda's hideout that was put there by John Walker so he could surveil them, and
it's the same as another murderer, right?
It's the one from Sakaido's or Akihito's daughter's murder. It's a
Challenger.
It's literally the Challenger's equipment.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Now we're on to episode 7. So they go back to the Challenger's home and do some further investigating there, and they find Akihito's particles are still there, and that's a big deal because like they talk about like a light breeze can knock these things away. They're very fragile, whatever they are. They're not easy to keep around. It's like finding fingerprints from people who were wearing gloves. It's like nearly impossible to find them. And he walks in, and he's like, "Whoa, there's a lot here." From from this murder that happened years ago. What is it, 2-3 years?
Yeah.
Right. And so they build a well of Akihito, and they put Hondo Machi in.
Because you can't go into your own idwell.
Yes, you cannot go into your own idwell because if you might realize who you are, and if you realize who you are in your own idwell, it'll create an idwell storm, which sounds much worse than it ends up actually being.
It's something about the subconscious realizing the conscious is there.
Yeah, right? your idwell will start updating and it will become like infinite, right? And then you can't get out of the infinite. Something like that.
The one issue I have with this is the unreliable narrator conundrum, where I want to know how they discovered this. Like, did this happen to a pilot at some point? Like, how do you know unless it's happened?
That's
curious
true.
about that.
They did also find the Challenger's particles, but I don't remember them using it. So in this well, in Akihito's well, it's a world full of squares on the ground with numbers on them. And the lightning is striking random squares, and there's a bunch of people around, and some are getting hit by the lightning. And she wakes up, and she's handcuffed to Kairu's body, who's been hit by lightning. And next to her is Akihito's body, who has also been hit by lightning. And so she figures out that the mystery is in this world. She points out, like, in the real world this isn't true, but in this world lightning never actually strikes twice, and I'm handcuffed to this body so that I won't move, and I will be safe. And that's very important. But she does unhandcuff herself. She figures out there's a 7-second increment between the lightning strikes. 9-second increment, and so she can run from
super important that
already hit squares. Is it?
No, it is 9, but I'm just laughing because I'm being pedantic.
Oh no, I actually was worried when I said 7, because I'm like, I hope that doesn't line up with other stuff, and I missed that. But 9 doesn't line up with anything, so that's fine.
Yeah, exactly.
His wife, Akihito's wife and daughter are also in here. And then Hanamachi they tell Hanamachi, like, there's people over there who are dying. She's like, yeah, you should probably go over there and help them. I'm a detective. I have a mystery to solve.
You have the tools to do it. You should go do it.
Yeah, and so Hanamachi continues on, and she finds a pilot seat, which is weird. That a pilot seat appeared inside an idwell, and she climbs into it, and in the seat is the name Kiki Asuki, so that is whose idwell it will take you to. And as she's climbing into it, and the rest of the team's like, she should not be doing that, get her out. That's really dangerous. Extract her. But oh my gosh, the cops rush in. They're like, hey, we figured out who John Walker is. It's Haishira, the director, runs in. He's like, guys, arrest Momoki. He is John Walker. We found the body of the scientist who invented this machine at his house, and
we even found the John Walker outfit.
Yeah, other evidence, a smorgasbord of evidence of just laying around his house.
Oh yeah,
that would be really easy for anyone who is sleeping there to find.
Right.
And so they arrest Momoki, and
did
so
you guys
they
know who it was at this point? Did you guys figure out who John Walker was?
100%. No, I'll say 80% because I had my suspicions of actually Matsuka. But
I didn't have anything to base it off of, but like back in like episode 5, I was like, I bet it's this guy.
It's his the second time he was on screen. By this time, my wife had started watching. I turned to her and was like, "It's totally him, right?" And she's like, "Yeah, it's totally him." But
it's also because John Walker had similar features.
Yes, that's exactly the reason. Like, if you wanted to trick me, you needed to make it not. There's only one character with those physical traits.
Yeah.
But that's why I actually, like, I was thinking, like, I really wanted it to be the assistant of the Kurakuru, the guy who ends up becoming the. I wanted it to be him because all of those characters look so similar or close to each other. You could shuffle the appearance around and maybe play with that, so that would have been a good twist. The only thing I thought is maybe Matsuka, who is like so bound by the book that his sense of justice got warped. But yeah, like you said, the physical features, it was like, all right, I guess it's him. Especially since he has no purpose in the story. I mentioned the should we just say it? Go ahead and just say it.
It's the chief.
It's the director. I had mentioned the director in standalone complex. But he has purpose in the story. Like he pulls political strings, he covers for them. This guy has just been around like, I'm the director and I'm also here.
I keep
I'm
the seat
well,
warm.
yeah. Like you appear like every 2-3 episodes just to remind us you exist, but you don't do anything. And also, you're the only man with white hair in this entire anime. So
Yep.
I think it's you. You have access to everything you need. You could totally be doing this. And yeah.
Yep. Up until, like you were saying, Jason, with like episode 5, I was really against the idea of John Walker being a real person. Even probably until here when they started trying to go after Momoki about it. I really didn't want John Walker to be a real person. I wanted him to be the embodiment of the desire of serial killers to kill, like made manifest inside their mind, that it looks similar for some reason. And I know that Togo or whatever her name is kind of debunked that in the first couple episodes, where she's like, the people in the environment reacted to John Walker when they didn't react to Kairu, so he can't be a factor that's produced by the machine. But still, I don't know. It felt like it was a little bit less satisfying for it to be a real person to me.
That's fair.
So Togo, who's the lady in the Kura crew, is chosen as the replacement to run the team, and then they go and tell Akihito about him being arrested because Momoki was his friend, and then the team actually deduces, hey, those lightning strikes weren't random. They put in a number of order, and if you Google it, because I have no idea how they would have figured it out without Google, they're like, it's literally a section of pi. It's typing out pi in the numbers, lightning strikes. And if you go back to where pi would have started based on the time of each lightning strike, it would have been the day his daughter died, the lightning strike started. Now you gotta remember, this Idwell is also Akihito's Idwell from the day he murdered the Challenger.
Mm-hmm.
Not current, but still the time went on in the Idwell. But yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
I think I figured out why the chair's there.
Okay. So let me ask the question.
Sure.
One of my, I wouldn't say a complaint, but one of my biggest is there's some unanswered questions in this anime. How did John Walker meet up with the reason for all this in the first place? Why did that thing exist? Those I kind of feel. The one thing I cannot figure out: why do the pilot chairs appear in other people's Idwells, and especially when we haven't seen them in most of the Idwells. But it shows up now in Akihito's, and then we'll have another one later in another person's. Jeremy's about to give me his theory. But
Crap. I forgot it was in the perforators as well. Never mind.
God dang it.
Jerry, you were gonna be our savior here.
When you were saying that, you were like, yeah, it's in other people's too. I was like, oh, crap, that's right. Oh, dang it, that theory's out.
Like I told you guys, my thought was that they actually did explain this in this anime, and I missed it. That's what it feels like to me. I don't feel like this is an unanswered question. I feel like there's a comment randomly somewhere about why these chairs are appearing, and I understand why they're appearing story wise and like what purpose they're serving. I just don't understand why they're appearing in these specific Idwells. Why Akihito's? Why Fukuda's later?
I agree with you. I remember a moment where it was said that the machine. I mean, God, we're so close to just spoiling.
Yeah, it's
major
all right. It's
spoiler.
all right.
Okay, so the Idwells are not actually being generated by a machine by itself. They're being generated by a person, and this person is the dead girl Kairu, whatever her name is.
Kairu.
It's her, Kairu. And so there's a moment where someone says that the chair is put there by Kairu. I swear I heard that, read it in the subtitles, but I'm like 99.99999% sure. There's like that tiny margin that I could be incorrect there in my own mind, doubting myself.
But why?
Well, but that's the thing. If we assume that Kairu did that based on what they're saying there, and then we also look at the fact that, like, why would Kairu stab herself and then walk around a train just to get him to walk over to these young people when there's absolutely nothing to solve there? why would Kairu at a later point actually kill herself and then leave like the knife in the hand of the evil brilliant detective so that he could immediately solve it? Like, it's made clear to us that Kairu is aware of what's going on in these wells. She's effectively, whether it's by her own subconscious or conscious, she is setting up the scenario to explain what's going on so that the brilliant detective can then solve it. So she is aware of what's going on, and she has agency in these worlds. So I think it's reasonable to believe that she could put the chairs there. Now, in the case of Fukuda, the perforator, I could see her putting the chair there because, she has something she wants to accomplish. In the case of Sakaido or Akihito, why is there a chair in his mind? I think that could be his obsession with her and her desire to be saved.
Don't forget though that John Walker knows there's going to be a chair here. It's part of his plan.
Wait, John Walker knows there's going to be a plan in Fukuda's?
No, he knows there's going to be a chair, a pilot seat in
Yeah.
Akihito's as well. Both of them.
Yeah. Well, I don't think he actually sent him in there for the chair. I think he sent him in there to get him lost in an id storm. Like, there was absolutely no benefit to him to have Sakaido go into the chair. That didn't help him at all.
Maybe.
I think he was just trying to get rid of him.
Unless he knew Sakaido was one of the only people that would be able to foil his plan, so he was trying to stop him before he enacted his plan.
It's the linchpin of everything, guys. Why do these chairs appear?
Yeah, that's what I think. I think, because that was my theory, is that I think that it's because of Akihito's desire to save her and her desire to be saved that winds up creating the chair there. Like, she either subconsciously accepts that he wants that and puts the chair there, even though it's kind of a trap for him, you might say. But that's not really what the trap was. The trap wasn't going into the chair. The trap was being stuck in his own idwell and disappearing forever. And then as far as Fukuda goes, I'm pretty sure that's just her ability to put something in there to solve a problem, to get rid of John Walker.
Even though she was very busy during that time.
If it was subconscious, that wouldn't matter.
Yeah, I get that. I figured that's what you'd say. You'd say, yeah. All right. And theories are fine, and with theories, like, it's very plausible everything you're saying, and I have no problem accepting you're saying. Like, I have no problem with theories of how John Walker met her, and I have no problem with where her power comes from. But like I said, I just felt like it was explained, and I missed it. It definitely felt like something that should have been explained compared to a lot of the other stuff. I don't need to know where her power comes from.
Right.
Maybe knowing how John Walker found her would be interesting, but it's not the most important thing. But the chair feels a little more important than the rest.
I'd agree with that.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah. So she goes into the chair and disappears, and they're like, "Oh my gosh, we lost her."
She's gone.
They cannot extract her when she goes.
Oh, he did.
Yep.
So they actually do some research on the name that was on the chair, Kiki Asakai. She was a patient in. And by the way, she's the one with the powers. She was in a hospital and then disappeared. She was actually one of the Challenger's almost victims, and after the Challenger was shot by Akihito, Momoki found her in his arena that he keeps in his basement, and had saved her, taken her to a hospital, and eventually she disappeared, and 13 nurses slipped into comas. And then everything else about it has been erased from the records by Momoki. They never come back and say, like, I use Momoki's key card. But Momoki was very connected with her because he was the one who rescued her, and so it was a big deal to him that she had disappeared. And we kind of got that sense from his conversations that, like, he does have some kind of bond with the Kairu of the wells. At least I thought so. And so then they send this is a very quick thing, but they do send Fukuda into Akihito's well, but he keeps getting struck by the lightning.
So they didn't want to send him, but he's like literally their only other option.
Right? Yeah, they're out of pilots now, and because they can't send Akihito, so they eventually pull him out, and then they send Matsuka back to Momochi's house, and he does a scan, and he finds some particles. So they decide to go into Momochi's idwell, and the director's like, "Hey, send two." That'll be great. So they send Akihito and Fukuda at the same time. And guys, Fukuda literally warns everyone about what he's about to do. he says it like he's like, "Oh, there's gonna be 2 brilliant detectives, but haven't you ever read a detective novel? There can only be one. So I guess one of us will be pretending not to know and get the answer wrong, and then the other one will get it. So the other one will be season smart." He's literally telling them everything he's about to do, and they're just like, "Well, that was creepy. Press play."
I think the reasoning behind sending 2 of them is because they were expecting to find another chair. Because they didn't know they thought they were going into Momoki's. They're like, "Oh, there's probably a chair in his, and one of them's gonna need to like go into the chair, and the other one's gonna have to extract them because the team up above doesn't have vision past the current idwell that's there."
Right. And they need someone to go in and get Hondo Machi, probably. You're right. That was the reason they needed 2 pilots.
I
but it was
remember somebody saying something about there being that there. I think it was the Brilliant Detectives later or something, but somebody was saying something about there's no, it was the analysts. I think it was the analysts saying there's probably a chair in every well. I don't think that's true. I think that's the unreliable narrator.
That would, but that, I mean, again, that is a theory that would also could make sense.
Yeah.
I have no problem with any theory that explains it. I officially do not think it is a plot hole, but it is definitely something I would like have to been explained.
Mm-hmm.
I agree.
All right, so they go in and they're in a desert, and they're next to they find Kairu's body in the sand, and they're like, she died of dehydration. And they notice that they have on both their wrists. I had that right? It's both their wrists.
Yeah.
Yep.
Both the wrists on both of them, and Kairu's body. There is clearly tan lines, or they were wearing something. And they're like, "Hey, we must have been wearing watches, and they got stolen."
It was fabric.
Well, he thought it was watches at this point.
It ends up being fabric, but they're not sure why they have.
They just know that. My first thought was handcuffs, actually.
But especially after seeing Hondomachi.
Right. Which and should have figured. So
And,
dumb. I am no brilliant detective.
Yeah, it didn't click with me either.
Fukuda's the first to wake up, right?
Yeah.
Yes. The team says that they're like, Fukuda's awake, but we can't see what he's doing yet. He hasn't like fully come online. And then Akihito comes on. It's also fun because even though these 2 characters know each other outside the well, they're meeting each other for the first time as the brilliant detective personalities. And so like Sakaido's like all serious, and Fukuda's, who's a Naido in there, is like, "You're so cool." And they find footprints in the sand. They're like, "That must be the guy who stole our watches. We should go after that." He's like, "What?" And Sakaido's like, "I want to look at the body more," because he's more obsessed with the body. So they pee on their clothes to preserve hydration because they're in the desert.
Yep.
But so they actually split up for a little bit, and then eventually he follows them. They catch up. Sakaido actually falls in quicksand, and Fukuda tells him how to get out of the quicksand. He's like, "You can basically just crawl out because that's how quicksand works." And you know what? I saw a lot of quicksand when I was a kid on television and movies, and it's been a long time, and so I just really appreciate that quicksand was in a work of fiction. Because I thought I'd be dealing with quicksand my whole life based on how I used to watch movies, and I've never seen quicksand in real life, and it kind of faded away from everything else. But it was nice to have quicksand come back. Anyway, they eventually catch up to the guy who stole their watches, and he's a dead corpse in quicksand. But next to it is a chair. And so they're like, "Hey, we should go in this chair, but only one of us can." So Akihito volunteers, and he's like, "Pull me, we'll press play, and then in 10 minutes you press the eject button, and I'll come back." And meanwhile, Momoki, who's being interrogated, is like, "Hey, they're going into your idwell," and he's like, "Wait, my idwell?" And he's like, "Don't, you gotta get him out. It's a trap." Admiral Akbar would have been proud of him.
And At this point, I wasn't quite sure what he meant by trap. Like,
Me neither.
was this a manufactured idwell to trap pilots for some nefarious reason? Like, that's where my brain was going at this point.
I was
My
thinking,
brain went to Inception.
yeah, I was thinking the chair was the trap, which obviously I still have a hard time shaking off. Like you said, that's probably not even part of John Walker's plan. I still was thinking John Walker had these chairs as part of the plan, but you're probably right that it's not. Yeah, so Akihito wakes up in his bedroom. It's years ago. His family is there. He has all his memories, and it's just a normal world. And he's like, oh, I only have 2 minutes left. So he runs and he hugs them. But then those 2 minutes go by and nothing happens. And so he goes to work, and they're looking for the Challenger. And he's like, hey, Momoki, get in the car with me. I want to go somewhere. He's like, we're going to go get the Challenger. He goes to the Challenger's house. He's like, Momoki, you go around back. And he goes in. And he goes up to the Challenger's this huge dude, rich dude, and he's like, hey, I know you're the serial killer of the Challenger, and I know you like to beat up, little girls and stuff, and you're so cool, but I'm here to kick your butt. And they have a fight. And this is hilarious to me because Akihito has already said, I'm not much of a fighter.
Yeah.
But they have this one of the most brutal fights I've seen in anime in a long time. Broken arms, smashing faces,
gunshots.
Yeah, Akihito cheats once he starts losing and starts shooting him in the legs and stuff. And he's like, how do you like it not having a fair fight? And eventually, after, he gets pummeled a lot, but eventually he bashes the Challenger's face in.
Momoki find out the Challenger, that's what he wanted. He wanted to get hurt during his fight.
He's a sadist and a masochist at the same time.
Yeah.
And Momoki runs in. He's like, "Oh my god, what'd you do?" He's like, "Go behind that curtain. There's stairs, and they find Kiki again."
By the way, self-defense.
Yeah, self-defense.
Yeah, self-defense. And so they find the girl just like they did last time, and she's taken to the hospital. Akihito is taken to the hospital, and he at night visits her, and she's like. He starts talking to her about the killer, and all of a sudden he sees the killer in his head. He sees the Challenger in his head. She's like, "Sorry, when I get upset or I can project images into people's heads, it's like you're picking up a radio wave." And then a serial killer comes in to kill her. He's the face remover.
Yeah, facelifter.
Yeah. Facelifter. Yeah, who he already cut off like a nurse's face. He walks in just holding it, and he's like, "I'm here to kill you." And Akihito hits him with some hospital stuff, and he disappears, and he's really upset, it was my night to be here, and he disappears, and he's like, what is going on? And then he wakes up and his family's visiting him, and he goes back down to Kiki's room in the daytime, and she's like, yeah, you were in my dream. Serial killers come to visit me in my dreams to murder me because of my psychic powers. It started with John Walker, but then he started inviting other killers in. And because of my psychic powers, I just keep having to relive these deaths over and over again.
It's basically describing the Nightmare on Elm Street, but you don't die when you wake up. You just have to keep reliving being murdered in your dreams.
Mm-hmm.
So he decides to help her, and he goes and confronts the real facelifter in real life. And he's like, I'm going to ask you some questions, and then we're going to have some chat.
In a wheelchair, no less.
Mm-hmm. And then he goes back to the hospital. He wakes up in the hospital and has a nightmare of his wife committing suicide. And man, this conversation is brutal. Where she's like, I would never leave you like that. And we know that happened. It actually made me think her suicide was a red herring or done by John Walker to push him to his inevitable end. Because the way she's talking about how I would never leave on you, and then we know that she did. I was thinking maybe she didn't, but that's not the case. She did suicide.
There's one line that she says there that just, oh my god, it made me doubt the arrangement of reality. I thought maybe this was reality, the other one wasn't, because she even comes right out and she says, that's how you know it's reality, is because I would never leave you. And I'm like, wait, wait, no.
Ugh.
It's so twisted. And I doubted for a minute there. I was like, okay, so the other world must have been fake. This is the real world. And so then when it all started shifting and falling apart, I was like, oh, that was so good. That line.
I was in your boat for there was like a full episode there where I was going, was everything beforehand just like an external dream that he's been having because of this girl, and
Yes.
this is
So-
reality? Like, are they
Exactly.
gonna pull a whole switcheroo on me? And then
I'll
Oh
tell
my
you why
gosh.
you thought that. They set you up deliberately because I was with you guys, but
Yep.
so he goes and talks to her again, and she's talking about the dreams about the killer, and she mentions they are predictive sometimes. She can see
Yes.
possible
Yes.
futures, and so that
Yes.
that makes you doubt, is everything we've seen just a prediction of what would happen if these killers ran
Right.
rampant?
Yes.
and that's what happens to the character. Akihito is like, oh, this is reality. Obviously, my wife and daughter are here. This
Yep.
needs to be reality. Oh, it's so rough.
Yep.
But you're right. Yeah, they set up the character and the audience to doubt everything we've seen, and
Yeah.
because see how much like emotional weight this carries for him. I don't know if I actually believed it or if I just wanted to believe it so bad
Right.
for him.
Dude, you want him to be together with his family so bad in this moment that you're willing to like literally discount the entire first half of the season.
Yes.
I wasn't even
exactly.
mad. I was like, yeah, I'm okay with this.
Yeah. Yeah. I was too. Yep.
So he goes on a mission he keeps eliminating these serial killers. We see the facelifters committed suicide. So he basically visits all of these other serial killers. There's the thigh separator and the arm ripper and
tongue terror.
yeah. And he starts paying them all visits. Um,
And he's like taking detailed notes as well because he's trying to track John Walker as well.
right.
But he's doing it in secret, which I find interesting.
Right. And then eventually, some time has passed, and he comes back to the hospital to kind of update her. And Momoki is also visiting. And when they come in, there's a scientist who's putting like a special helmet on her. And the scientist is like, "Oh, I believe." And Momoki's like, "Hey, wait, I want to talk to you about what's going on here." So that leaves Akihito alone with her, and he's telling her, "Hey, I've done all this, but I haven't been able to find John Walker." And she tells him, "I'm disintegrating. But when I do, the world will disintegrate with me. Please kill me so that doesn't happen." And he's like, "Yeah, I'm not going to do that." And he basically like I'm done. I've done my part. I fulfilled my mission. I'm out. And then he gets a call.
Very Sakaido of him, by the way.
Which fits in later.
He gets a call. Time has passed. He gets another call from Momoki, who's like, she's disappeared from the hospital. There's 13 nurses in a coma. Again, the events have repeated. And he's like, I don't know anything about that.
No,
Like,
totally blows him off.
Yep, that's weird, but nothing to do with me.
And so, and this is some of the stuff that made me really, really doubt, oh, this is reality, because we kept having scenes of people interacting with each other and doing stuff independent of Akihito. And I'm going, oh, okay, well, if he's not there and people are still interacting, this place must be reality.
Yep. But in the end, it actually makes a lot of sense given the origin.
Yes. He remembers that he hasn't taken care of Fukuda yet. So he goes to where the first episode found Fukuda drilling holes, and while he's getting ready to go get him, Hondomachi appears. And she's like, "Hey, Akihito, what are you doing here?" He's like, "We don't know each other. We haven't met." And she's like, "No, this is an Idwell. You're not in the real world." He's like, No, this is the real world." And then, like lights start flying up in the sky, and the world is deconstructing.
Oh, there's something even better. I forgot when we were going through the pre-show and talking about our favorite parts. This was my favorite part, and I forgot about it. This was amazing. I actually stopped and rewound to see if I saw everything right. There's a moment where the camera pans from him to her, and then it pans back from her to him, and it shows you the same scene. It's a little parking lot filled with cars. The cars are different when it pans to her.
Oh.
There's different cars in that parking lot, and then when they pan back, it's a completely different set. The world that she's seeing is different than the world that he's seeing.
Dude.
And I was like, "Oh my god, this is
I
awesome."
didn't catch that.
Yep.
So she's like, yeah, I got into the chair in your Idwell. I've been here for about 20 minutes. He's like, I've been here for over 2 years.
Yeah.
A lot of time has passed for him. And he picks up the phone and he calls his wife and daughter. And he's like, you gotta run. You have to run. They're like, what are you talking about? And we get this flashback set to beautiful music.
God.
And yeah, I
So
teared up.
painful.
I mean, like, one of the things I do is like watch horror movies with my wife and daughter. There's a shot of them on the couch together as a family, and the daughter's got her legs draped over him, and they're just kind of casually watching TV on the couch. So I'm like, that could literally be a shot of my family. But you see the flashbacks of his whole courtship or dating his wife, falling in love, getting married, having a baby, raising this kid. And then he's like telling them goodbye now over the phone, and they're like, "Are you going?" He's like, "You're the ones who left me."
And you even
But-
see like the murder. You see the dead body, and you see the suicide dead body, and
Episode 10 is brutal. It's so brutal. Right before we recorded this podcast, that's where actually my wife was. She just finished. I went in and gave her like a hug. I'm like, that was rough. I know.
And watching the knife plunge into her wrist, my heart just like exploded. I was just like, no.
Yep.
They don't know how long it'll take for the world to collapse. You know, it could take any amount of time. So he's like, let's go keep investigating together on John Walker and get information while we can. And then right then it shows Fukada back in the desert. He's like, oh, time's up. He hits
It's
eject.
like 58, 59, 10 minutes.
And so he like starts flying up in the air and he throws her his notebooks of all the notes he's taken since he's been there. And he's ejected and he turns back into Sakaido in the desert. Doesn't remember anything that happened in the pilot seat. So she takes up the notebook and goes on to continue. And then Fukada, he has all these numbers written on the pilot machine. He's like, I was counting sand. Don't worry about it.
No question.
They find out that the dead body in the quicksand had Akihito's family photo in his hand. It's actually Akihito's body. And then he realizes what was missing from their hands. And he realizes it because it's in Fukada's pocket. They were tied together to Kairu so that they wouldn't leave her. And the team can see them now and is like, that sounds familiar. It is familiar because it's the same thing that happened in Akihito's well. You're handcuffed to Kairu so you don't leave her and you stay safe. So Fukada reveals, actually, I'm still Fukada. I'm not the brilliant detective. I keep all my memories when I come in here because I have this hole in my head. So I've known where we were the whole time, which is actually your Idwell. We're still in Akihito's Idwell, just in the future. It's from like a couple months ago instead of years ago.
Right. Because they got new particles from him.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Which shouldn't have been because they're from Momoki's house. But yes, it was his new particles. So they're in an updated version of that original Idwell. And the lightning has stopped, but underneath the sand that are still those numbers. And he then tells them, by the way, you're not really Sakaido, you're Akihito, a former cop. And that brings all his memories back, and that creates an id storm.
Yeah.
Which looks like a big sand hurricane, basically, a big sand tornado that's growing. Togo is like, oh crap, that's the worst thing that could happen. Please cut the power. And they're like, okay, we did, but it's still running. It doesn't.
They tried to extract them first, but they were like, we lost them. We can't find them.
Can't extract them. Can't turn off the power. They do say this is never. Well, she says this has never happened before because she's like, let's turn off the power. They're like, well, what will that do? She's like, no one knows, but we have to do something. Also, great IT. Turn it off, turn it back on again.
Yeah, exactly.
They're like, either Matsuoko set us up. No, we didn't. Or we got played. And so they send him back to Momoki's house. He's looking around the room. There's like, where did these particles come from? And Togo's like, that picture on that dresser doesn't belong there. and every analyst is like, knew it. She was banging on. I
Called
love
it.
that moment so much. Anyway, inside the frame behind another picture is the picture from Akihito's cell, where he was forcing people to commit suicide. So his murderous intent is on it.
From the
That's how they get-
pyrotechnic.
Yep, from the pyrotechnic.
Meaning it has to be someone with access to both facilities, or well, the facility and Momoki's house.
Akihito decides not to kill Fukada for his betrayal, and Fukada's like, "But that's what I did this for. You're supposed to kill me. I have a death wish." And he points out, when we come in here, the hole in my head heals, and I had arithmomania, which is an obsession with numbers. And so every time he goes into the Idwell, it brings it back, and that's why he's been dying so fast, is because he doesn't want to get stuck with that mental illness. He drilled a hole in his head to get rid of.
Yep.
In fact, early in the season, we get this room full of numbers, and there's just no context to it. And then they re-show it in this moment. You're like, oh god, that was him writing all those numbers on the walls.
Yep. We also see, like, when he's walking through and getting struck by lightning previously, he's actually mumbling to himself, "Oh man, look at all these numbers. There's nobody could count all these numbers. I mean, they must not be able to solve this. That must be the point of this." And then lightning strikes him. When in reality, he's memorizing every single one of them.
So that's the other thing. He basically is like, yeah, I know exactly where we are because I remembered every single number in this whole world because I have to. I'm just obsessed with it. He's like, which means he's like, then you know exactly where the pilot seat with Hondo is, and we need to go get her. Because the Idwell updated it, brought that old Idwell stuff over to this new Idwell. Excuse me. So they go to get her. Meanwhile, she's still in the fake Kiki world. And she actually goes and talks to Fukada there, the digital Fukada, and she asks him, "Hey, when did you start dreaming about John Walker?"
I love this interaction, by the way, because
and
it's
he's
like before his first kill.
It was,
And-
yep. And he's like, "It was on these dates." And she's like, "Wait, it was, you know the specific dates?" He's like, "Yeah, I have a obsession. I have a thing about number. I used to have a thing about numbers." She's like, "Well, do you know the time?" She's like, "These specific times." And she checks the logbook. She's like, "Well, there's no employees around, or that would be sleep to be in your dream at that time." He's like, "Well, what about if they weren't in Japan?" She's like, "Oh, traveling overseas." She checks those records and she figures out, I know who John Walker is. The crazy part is she calls him in the fake world. She calls the director and is like, "Hello, John Walker."
Yep.
It's kind of badass, actually. Like,
it verifies her, so that she gets the reaction. She's like, "Yep."
because she knows what she does in this world kind of doesn't matter, right? She's gonna get pulled out at some point.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
She also had figured out that he had created 7 killers and allowed each of them to kill 7 victims, and they each were allowed to kill one day of each week, or so the Monday killer, a Tuesday killer.
Yeah, that's right. That's how she kind of figured out. She's like, it's like
He's
was
obsessed with
someone
7.
directing as if they had a job.
Yep.
Yep.
Yeah,
And with an
that's where
obsession
I'm
with 7.
curious about the number with the Gravedigger. Apparently, the 2 must be considered cumulative because he did visit both. So I guess he's just considering them to be one killer.
Yeah, because only one of them is actually killing, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
But then she's ejected, and so she tells Atsuki, Akihito, and Fukada the truth. Then they're like, "Okay, now lead us back to Kairu." They're able to find Kairu, and that puts them in the center of the storm, so that the team's able to find them, and they get extracted. And they pop out, and they say, "We know who
Like
John
an
Walker
idiot.
is." They yell out into the comms, "We know who John Walker is." And they're like, "Okay, we need to go arrest him." And then all the power shuts off.
Yep.
And John Walker / Hayasura goes and frees Kiki to let her out. Guys, thoughts on our villain, John Walker?
I think he's vastly more interesting from this point on, because like before, he was just kind of there and kind of being set up to be the villain. his motivation was a little confusing to me, like why he. But Hanamachi like calls him out on it. It's like you have a god complex, and so that was better. But like in this moment, he's like, yeah, I've done some terrible things, but he's got the L issue. I am justice, or at
Yeah,
least my own form of justice.
it's Minority Report. It's we created a technology to defeat serial killers. I needed to put it into use to prove it could work, and so I. But like she points out, you actually are a psychopath who just got off on it. Like there's more to it than the practical reason. But it is literally this is the plot of even when he frees her, she's in a pool of water, just like Minority Report.
Yeah.
Like this is so Minority Report, but that's fine. I love Minority Report, so I was cool with it.
Yeah. I thought it was cool because he wound up doing the same thing that every other serial killer did, lie to himself and lie to everybody else.
Mhm.
Because he doesn't want to acknowledge what his real motivations are. He wants to be better than he wants to be seen as better than he really is. And there was I said it before where I really would have loved it if John Walker wound up not being a person. And I'm not super happy with how kind of obvious it was that it was him, simply because he had no other role to fill. But once they got him going, I was intrigued by the character, and I actually did find him entertaining, the interactions.
Yeah.
The power scale was crazy different between them when they start fighting, which I thought was really interesting. I mean,
Yeah, he has a
hovering.
control over these worlds that the others just don't.
Exactly.
He says something like, because I've been around her so much and going into her dreams for so long, like he knows how to manipulate the power.
Yeah.
And he's basically Neo.
Yeah, exactly. Evil Neo. And that's one of the things that was kind of odd to me is Kairu says that when John Walker first visited her, he was killing her in her dreams. He wasn't just visiting her in her dreams.
Right.
He was killing her in her dreams. And so he is in fact a serial killer himself, not just a maker of serial killers. Only he hasn't done it to a real person outside of the dream, just her over and over again. It also makes me a little bit curious as to whether or not he really was the first, because I have to wonder how long ago that was. The reason I'm saying that is because when we get the medical record about Kairu, it sounds like she's a young child when she starts suffering from these issues, and then she goes into I don't know, sanitarium or something. She goes into something. I don't remember the details exactly, but she goes into something, gets treated for a while, comes out, becomes an artist, and then goes back in and then disappears or something. So it seems like she's been having these issues for quite a while, and I kind of wonder whether or not he visited her many, many years ago. And we see all those masks when he does wind up going back in there, and I kind of wonder if, because she says, that's all the wells that have connected up to hers, like the serial killers that have killed her over the years, is the impression that I got. And that's a whole lot more than those that he created.
No, it's every serial killer in the world. Her powers has expanded beyond Japan. She now can connect to every serial killer in the world. So he can go to every Idwell ever.
But I imagined that those were the ones that she's that have visited her. I didn't think it was just the ones that she could connect to, like the fact that they exist. I thought it was that they had visited her. And that's where I got a little bit confused. Maybe it is just that she's picking up on them, and so now she, can connect in their portals. But in any case, I don't know. John Walker's majority of how he's interesting relates to Kairu for me.
I agree about the twist isn't as good as it could have been. I didn't, like I said, I turned to my wife in an early episode. Was like, it's him. She's like, it's him. And I mean, while I wasn't 100%, it was a little too obvious. But I do love that he is a villain that they have to outwit rather than outfight. Like, it's not a power battle. Very much true to that. This has been a mystery thriller. They have to outsmart the villain when he has and everything is happening according to his plan. He's winning 100%. Him getting caught is part of it. Like, this was all gonna, he's fine. He releases Kiki. She walks around and is like putting people into dreams world psychopath dream worlds. They're just all getting sucked in like they're going into these Idwells. And then he comes in, shoots Akihito in the gut, shoots himself in the gut, jumps into a pilot seat, turns it on, and then shoots himself in the head. And so he goes into her Idwell. No, his own Idwell. He goes into his own Idwell, right?
I believe it's his own, but yeah,
Yeah.
it was a one-way trip.
Right. Goes into his own
Yeah.
Idwell because he says the only reason this storm isn't happening is because I'm dead. So there's no psyche or nothing can keep growing. My brain's dead.
No upscaling.
So now he exists only in this world, and like you said, there's all it is like this giant room of faces and masks, and every mask is a killer in the world, and you can go into their Idwell so he can teleport to every Idwell. Akihito goes in after him. Hondo goes in after him. Hondo Machi, I call her Hondo because that's what I wrote in the notes. And then they're like, Fukada, come with us. She's like, Fukada, you gotta come with us. He's like, I don't want to come with you. And he's like, all right, I'll do it.
But then he doesn't.
But then he doesn't. He actually gets hit by Kiki's brainwaves and falls into the world anyway, but not through the pilot seat. They chase him down for a while, and they have this really cool fight. And this really like they're on top of this creepy red baby thing with a pool of blood and sharks in it. Sakaido attacks him, or Akihito attacks him, and starts
I love
losing.
his line. If you're gonna do a sneak attack, don't scream while you're doing it.
Exactly.
And then Hondo Machi jumps out holding a shark and hits him with the shark mouth. Guys, I literally wrote the note. She hit him with a mother effing shark. I was like, okay.
It was totally a scene out of Sharknado, but with a girl writing it.
Yep.
He comes back out and he like regenerates what got bit off. He's like, that was clever, but it doesn't matter because I'm dead in the real world. I'll just heal here. So they take his hat and they're like, chase us. And he's like, that's so dumb, but I mean, I guess I will. I don't know anything better to do.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna cover his story and then we'll do Momoki's story. Meanwhile, also the technicians are running from giant boulders that can hear sound. Nothing important. They're not in it.
I love that they all wake up in the same spot and they're like,
Yep.
is this just reality or did something change? And then all these huge boulders are chasing them like Indiana Jones style.
Yep.
Anyway, so I skipped over a bunch of stuff too. And there was a great song when the fight started because they had to go into their own Idwells, learn their identities, and then when they went back to the branching place with all the masks, Fukada gets shot by Inami. Inami got sucked in with a security guard, stole his gun, shot him, came to kill Hanamachi.
How she got to John Walker's Idwell, like that was
I think
impressive.
if you can find Kairu's body, you can leave a Idwell. With this current setup. Yeah, because I keep finding her body and then like flying up in the air. And I was wondering, like, is there someone who's responsible for that? I couldn't tell. But yeah, Fukada had saved her from her own drill world, and then he saved her from this bullet to get shot. This death scene is crazy because he's like, he tells her all this stuff, and she's like, hey, by the way, since you drilled a hole in my head, I can see stuff that are broken into pieces. I see as whole. That's how I've been solving crimes this whole time, and I see you as a whole person. I don't see the burnt side anymore.
Actually, yeah, this is where we find out the picture that was ripped up that gave away what's her face's identity. Her face was missing from the picture, but because she sees pieces as a whole, she knew who she was.
Yep.
He had, oh god, I forget the 3 wishes. He says, I died with 3 wishes. One, that you would see me as whole. One, that I would die. And what's the third one? I can't remember.
Can't remember.
Yeah, he gets 3 wishes. That he says something about like, there's always another hole. She's like, don't be gross. He's like, that's not what I meant. Inami then leaves to Kazuto's Idwell. And she's like, I'll get to be with Kazuta. And then John Walker in that world just butchers her.
Yeah, Hanamachi like, no, don't go.
I was hoping it would be the girl version of her in that world that stabbed her. That'd be like, you got too close to Kazuta. You're not allowed to do that. That would have been a little more comeuppance. But it's fine. All right, back to the actual ending. They get John Walker to go to Fukada's world. And he's like, oh, I bet Fukada's hiding somewhere to get me. And he sits down and they're laughing at him. And he's like, what's wrong? And then all of a sudden, Akihito's hand comes flying out. Because remember, in this world, he can detach his hand. Guys, the reason the OP has been obsessed with the first couple episodes is because you needed to remember for this final episode how this world worked. His hand comes flying in and pins him to the chair. And he's like, oh, by the way, that's not just a regular chair. That's a pilot seat. You can't tell because this world's in fragments. But guess what? My partner here, who has a hole in her head, does see the world in complete pieces. So she doesn't see in fragments anymore. And they activate the pilot seat and they send him to Kiki's digital world. And then they break the machine so he can never come out. And
that world is falling apart.
That world is technically falling apart. Who knows how long? And who knows what happens when it does? They don't know if that'll kill you. He might come back.
Well, it's really interesting because when he does wind up waking up in that world, they know who he is and they attack him in that world.
Yeah.
Which means that Kiki's updated their information in her own world.
Right. He wakes up the moment before he shot himself, getting arrested instead of shooting himself.
Yep.
But I do like it leaves it just open ended enough they could bring him back if they need to for a future villain. So again, I don't know why a chair shows up in this world though. But
I think he put it there, but who knows? We don't know.
We have our theories.
Yep.
Then they have to sit there and wait to be extracted. Meanwhile, Momoki, who's now suddenly a main character, gets the helmet from the hospital that blocks Kiki's brainwaves, and he gets this suit that comes with like defibrillator pads and the ability to inject adrenaline. And he goes into the building because the whole building is now like her world. You walk in, you're instantly, and it even says like, I walked in, I'm nauseous, I don't feel good. And he goes up half the stairs and he dies. And they have to defibrillate him and adrenaline shock him back to life.
No, he doesn't die. He's falling into the world.
No,
and he's like, huh?
He flatlines.
No, he flatlines because of the adrenaline. They're pumping into his body.
Oh, okay.
He was about to pass out. He's like, hit him with adrenaline. He's like, we can't. It'll kill him. He's like, do it anyways.
Do it anyway. That's true.
Yeah, and then he flatlines.
He wakes up, throws up in his helmet, and I love that they kept it on the front of his visor. Like, where's it gonna go? He gets to her, and she's never really met Akito in real life, but he's the one who rescued her in real life. And she's like, "It's you. You can rescue me again." And he pulls a gun on her, and they go through this whole thing. And eventually, he throws the gun away. He's like, "I'm a cop. I can't kill you." And she picks up the gun and is like, "I'll do it for you." Click. There's no bullets. Okay, why'd you pull the gun in the first place? Whatever. They talk about, hey, maybe you could go away to a cabin and maybe you could use that suit to come visit me. But they both know the only way to fix this is you got to go back in the tank. And so they march her down there. And he tells her, I promise you someday. And she even says, like, it's okay. It's not as bad because at least I know I'm helping in here. But he's like, I promise you someday we'll get you out. And then right before she does, she sees Akihito, and I think this is a callback to her that she sees the future sometimes, and that he is going to save her someday, and she's seeing her own redemption. Again, at this time, I'm thinking this is the final episode. We'll never get any more of the story, and so this is a gleam of hope that we can at least. There's a good chance she will be saved someday. And then she gets put in. They pull everyone out. Everyone's okay. Oh, Fukada's dead. They check his pulse. He's dead.
He's in a coma, apparently.
No, he's dead.
According to the wiki, it says he's in a coma.
She checks his pulse.
I saw her do that.
Pulse.
Yeah, I saw her do that. But
no.
it says he's in a coma.
All right, we'll see.
I mean, that makes sense because no one's died in the real world from dying.
Who trusts wikis though? Really? Seriously.
Well, it's implied he died.
Seeing that he is still comatose, it says.
Okay, I mean, no one's officially said he's dead. I'll give you that, but
he's not dead.
She sheds a single tear for him.
Yep.
I gave him a single tear. And then we get a voiceover by Hanamachi about what's going on since all this happened. She's like, we all agreed that anything that happens here we would keep secret, so we covered this all up and just kept going.
Yep.
And then it shows them going to their next case, and they're just gonna keep. it's like the opposite ending of Minority Report. Not to spoil that really old movie, but yeah, this was exposed as a terrible, horrible thing. We're gonna keep going. Screw it.
Yeah.
We signed an NDA. What are we gonna do?
Yep.
All right, and that brings us to our end. Any thoughts on the ending that I rushed through and totally missed some of the epicness of it,
I'm
especially the song that plays. So good.
I'm so conflicted because this is such a complete story, but yet just like if I was watching CSI, I want like 10 more seasons of this. But at the same time, I'm like, this is such a complete package. If I didn't get any more of it, I would be happy with what I got because the writing is so tight and the storytelling was so well done. I'm really happy with what we got here.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the funniest parts to me, and it was funny in like the gross way funny, was when we don't even know whose mind they were in, but they were in some serial killer's mind. And this is the one where the shark was. There's like this giant baby that's sitting
Yeah.
in the middle of this bloody bathwater.
So
with sharks.
creepy.
It was so creepy. But it was funny because like they're leaping around fighting, and the baby's literally like trying to hit him out of the air, but it's a baby. It's not doing a real good job. And yeah, there was so many moments of also when they took his hat, and his line just cracked me up because he's like, oh, you're trying to provoke me. Well, that's not gonna work, but I'm gonna come get you anyway. You could just tell he totally was provoked. It actually pissed him off because as having that god complex, even just getting his hat was enough to where he's like, you can't do that. That's not allowed.
Right.
There was so much
Oh yeah,
subtlety to it.
I missed the callback. She asked because Fukada's obsessed with the number 3. He thinks it's the perfect number, and she asked him, "What about the number 7?" He's like,
So
it's
cliche.
it's pretentious. Yeah, people like it for the wrong reasons because of luck and God and all that
Yeah.
religious stuff. It's like
Yep.
it's a pretentious number. So she then goes to the bad guy and is like, yeah, you have a God complex because you love the number 7.
Yeah.
So
He even brings
everything,
up it's like it's a divine number.
yeah. It's divine. All
Yeah,
right.
that was one of the reasons why I thought that they actually brought him here. Was I thought that maybe there was some kind of subconscious reaction that would happen because he loved the number 7 so much that like the world would rebel against him and the world would defeat him somehow. I'm glad they didn't do that, but that was where my mind went.
All right, guys, let's go to our final reviews. Jason, you picked it. What you giving it?
This would go in like, I'm not sure if it would go in my top 10, but it's definitely gonna like top 20. Like this is such a great package. I love the storytelling. The mystery was fun to go along with, and the concept was just so cool. They gleaned a bunch of different concepts from different shows, mashed them together, and made a really great mystery. I gotta give this one a 5. This was fantastic writing.
Hey, Jeremy.
Absolutely agree. This was great, and it's not even like riding on the back of a less than favorable anime not that long ago. Like that isn't even what's doing it. Where it's like a comparison on its own merit. This anime is just really really good. The story gives you so many surreal environments, and they just keep changing up. And I would love to see more of these surreal environments explored. Like what takes place. How can you link the origin point, the spark of a serial killer's drive to kill? Like how you can link that into some kind of tangible world with its own rules, and then leave that open for the audience to try and interpret as the brilliant detective is deducing everything. That there's so much in that is available to be used in future seasons. I really hope that they continue. I hope they don't stop. Yeah, it's just really, really good. I am also going to give it a 5.
Okay. I'm gonna give it a 4, which doesn't properly reflect how much I enjoyed it. But just because the first half with the standalone mysteries, they are interconnected, but like going through the Gravedigger mystery stuff is so good. And then we get to the second half, which is kind of like a watered down Minority Report. Still good, but obviously not where their strength lies in their storytelling. It was much more in that individual cases. But either way, I would be happy. I'm okay if this is over, but I would absolutely love more. If they're like, hey, well, here's 100 more mysteries, so I'd be like, yeah, let's go. all day.
Let's do this.
And it's the first time in a while my wife has really wanted to watch an anime. My daughter was visiting from college and she saw me watching the third episode, so she went and watched it by herself and got ahead of me. That's really cool. That like it literally sells itself just on those first couple episodes, and that can't be ignored. So a 4 for me, but I enjoyed it in a level of a 5. Oh, and also the animation bugged me sometimes. It did. All right. Our next anime is No Gun Life. We're watching
Life.
No Guns Life. We're watching the first season, which is the first 12 episodes. I don't know much about it. I know the guy has a gun for a head.
That's what got me. That's what got my interest.
Is it like a detective story?
So
sci-fi?
So it's cyberpunk, and from what I can tell, it's like a post Great War where these cyborgs are kind of the remnants of the war, and they are essentially just kind of making it in society. But something is going on that pulls this character into sort of it seems noir to me, into a sort of noir mystery. Yeah.
All right. We're doing the first season now. And then we'll do the second season immediately after. I guess there's only one episode left to air, so we'll have plenty of time to catch up to that. All right. If you have thoughts on Id Invaded or any other anime we watch, you can leave a comment on our Twitter at Baka Podcast, on our email, theanimebakaclub@gmail.com, or leave a comment wherever you found the podcast, and we'll get back to you. Thank you for all those who follow along, listen, and comment. We absolutely love to hear that. Let's go ahead and say goodbye.
Thanks for listening.
See you next time.
Sayonara.